The desert sun hung like a brass coin in a cloudless sky, burning everything it touched. Heat shimmered across the endless red earth where nothing moved but wind and dust. Margaret O'Brien pressed a damp handkerchief to her throat and tasted grit with every breath. Her boots, proper Boston leather made for tidy streets, not the cruel Arizona trail, had rubbed her feet raw. She had been walking for hours, maybe days. The blazing sun had stolen all sense of time. The stagecoach to Tombstone, the only link to work, food, and hope, had left Copper Creek 2 days before she arrived. The town itself was dying, its copper veins emptied, its people scattered like tumbleweeds. She had come west to teach, to build a life with her own hands. Now she was stranded, alone, and running out of water. Pride had driven her farther than sense. There wasn't enough money left for a horse, barely enough for a meal. The teaching certificate she'd wrapped in oilcloth mocked her from the bottom of her carpet bag. Adventure and opportunity await, the advertisement in the Boston Globe had promised. Instead, the only adventure waiting now was death under a merciless sun. Her canteen was empty, her throat burned. The world tilted and blurred until the desert itself seemed to breathe. Margaret stumbled, knees striking the hard earth. The carpet bag slipped from her fingers and burst open, spilling her life across the dust. Books, a hairbrush, that precious certificate. She crawled toward the thin shadow of a mesquite bush, collapsed, and lay still. A hawk cried high above, circling. The sound echoed through the stillness, lonely and final. Margaret closed her eyes around the small silver locket at her throat, her mother's last gift, and whispered a prayer. She had tried. Surely that counted for something. Then came the thunder of hoofbeats, slow at first, then closer, steadier. She forced her eyes open, and through the shimmer of heat, saw a horse and rider, a tall man, broad-shouldered, his figure blurred by distance. She wondered if she was dreaming until he swung down from the saddle and knelt beside her. "Well, I'll be," the deep voice muttered. "Miss, can you hear me?" Quote. Strong hands lifted her gently. He pulled a canteen from his belt and held it to her lips. "Easy now," he warned as she drank greedily. "Too fast, and you'll make yourself sick." The water was warm, tasted of metal, but to Margaret it was the sweetest thing she'd ever known. When her vision cleared, she found herself staring into eyes the color of sage honey, steady and kind beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "Jim Morrison," he said. "Most folks call me Big Jim. Own the Circle M Ranch 5 miles north. What in blazes are you doing out here alone?" "Margaret O'Brien," she answered weakly. "I was trying to reach Tombstone. The stagecoach had gone. And I—" Her voice faltered as dizziness returned. Jim caught her before she fell again, muttering under his breath. "Tombstone's 30 miles through rough country. You wouldn't have made it another hour, let alone 3 days." "I have to find work," Margaret said, her pride flaring through exhaustion. "I'm a teacher." He studied her a long moment, as if measuring her worth. "Can you ride?" Quote. "A little." "That'll do." He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, set her on his horse, then swung up behind her. One strong arm circled her waist, steady and sure. "We'll get you safe," he said simply. "I can't pay for lodging," she protested, even as she leaned back against his solid frame. "Did I ask for pay?" His voice rumbled close to her ear. "Rosa will have my hide if I leave a lady to die in the desert. Besides, maybe you can teach some of my hands to read. Half of them can't sign their own names." Heat flushed Margaret's cheeks, not from the sun this time. "I misjudged you, Mr. Morrison." "No harm done. Out here, a woman alone's got reason to be cautious." They rode in silence, the rhythmic sway of the horse lulling her toward sleep. Each time she drifted, she felt his arm tighten to steady her. When she woke again, the sun was lower, throwing long gold light over hills turning green with juniper. Below them spread a wide valley and, at its heart, the Circle M Ranch, sturdy adobe house, smoke curling from the chimney, corrals alive with cattle. To Margaret looked like a miracle. "Welcome to the Circle M," Jim said. "It ain't Boston, but it's home." A woman with graying hair and a firm step hurried from the porch. "Dios mío, James Morrison! What have you done now?" "Found her half dead on the Tombstone Trail," Jim explained. "Miss O'Brien, this is Rosa. She keeps the rest of us alive." Rosa clicked her tongue, half scolding, half worried. "Bring her in, quickly." The next hours passed in a blur of warmth and care. Cool water, clean sheets, Rosa's strong hands tending her with gentle precision. Margaret drifted in and out of sleep, hearing voices, the soft nicker of horses, and once, Jim's quiet tone asking if she'd be all right. When she finally woke, lamplight glowed soft and golden. Rosa sat beside the bed, knitting. "You live," she said matter-of-factly. "Foolish girl, walking through the desert like that. What were you thinking?" "I wasn't," Margaret admitted. "I just needed a place to belong." Rosa's stern face softened. "Then maybe you found one." Later, Jim appeared at the doorway, hat in hand. "How's our patient?" "She'll live," Rosa replied briskly. "I wanted to thank you again," Margaret said. "You saved my life." He shrugged, embarrassed. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said quietly, "not anyone." He cleared his throat. "When you're stronger, we'll talk about that teaching arrangement. Room and board in exchange for lessons. Sound fair?" "Yes," she said before she could think. "It sounds perfect." Jim smiled then, a rare, warm smile that made the lamplight seem brighter. "Good. Get some rest, Miss O'Brien." Ranch life starts early. As his footsteps faded, Margaret touched the silver locket at her throat. The desert had nearly taken her, but it had also brought her here, to safety, to promise, maybe even to something more. Outside, coyotes sang under the moon, their wild voices echoing across the valley. For the first time in weeks, Margaret slept without fear. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would earn her place at the Circle M. But tonight, she was alive, and she was not alone. The rooster's cry broke the soft quiet of dawn. Margaret woke with a start, disoriented until she remembered where she was. Not in her tiny Boston room, but in the Circle M ranch, where desert wind brushed against adobe walls and the air smelled of coffee and sun-warmed dust. Rosa appeared with a lamp and a neatly folded bundle. "Get up, Misha. Work waits for no one. These belong to my daughter. She's married now, but they should fit you." The cotton dress and sturdy boots were a revelation after days of rough travel clothes. Margaret dressed quickly, marveling at how comfortable she felt. When she stepped into the kitchen, Rosa already had breakfast going. Bacon crisping in a skillet, bread baking in the iron stove. The woman ran the kitchen like an army barracks. "You know your way around a pan?" Rosa asked without looking up. "My mother believed a woman should be useful," Margaret said, rolling up her sleeves. "Good woman," Rosa replied, handing her a knife. "Slice those potatoes thin?" Ranchers eat like wolves. Quote, "Within the hour, men began to appear. Dusty boots, sunburned faces, polite nods to Rosa, curious glances at the stranger. Margaret felt every eye on her but kept her chin up. She belonged here now, and she would prove it. Jim entered last, freshly shaved, his dark hair still damp from washing. "Morning, Miss O'Brien." He greeted with a grin that showed just enough warmth to make her heartbeat stumble. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison. Feel strong enough to earn your keep today?" "I intend to," she said. He chuckled. "That's the spirit." After breakfast, Jim gathered everyone in the yard. "Listen up, boys. This here's Miss Margaret O'Brien. She's going to teach whoever's willing to learn their letters. No shame in it. Contracts and bills don't read themselves." The men murmured uncertainly. One young hand, no more than 18, raised his calloused hand. "Beggin' your pardon, ma'am, but what good's book learnin' to a cowboy?" "What's your name?" Margaret asked. "Tommy." "Tommy Martinez." "Tell me, Mr. Martinez, can you read a bill of sale? Can you tell if a buyer's cheating you on price?" Tommy shifted, uneasy. "Big Jim handles that." "And if Big Jim's not around someday, will you let someone else decide your worth?" The group went quiet. An older cowboy nodded slowly. "Ladies got a point." Jim smiled, pride flickering in his eyes. "School's voluntary, but I'd take her advice. We'll set up in the barn tonight. You all bring your pride and a slate." That evening, the smell of hay mixed with the faint sweetness of lamp oil as Margaret wrote the alphabet on a board salvaged from an old crate. The men watched her chalk strokes like they were magic. "All right," she said, turning to them. "This is the letter A. Who wants to try?" To her surprise, Walter, a gray-haired cowboy with hands rough as bark, stepped forward. He copied the letter with clumsy precision, then looked to her for approval. "Perfect, Mr. Walsh," Margaret said, smiling. "You've just written the start of your own name." The old man's grin was pure boyish pride, and something warm settled in Margaret's chest. Teaching again felt right. Better than right. It felt like purpose. As days turned into weeks, life at the Circle M found a rhythm. Mornings began with chores and Rosa's hearty breakfasts. Afternoons, Margaret prepared lessons or mended clothing. Evenings, she taught beneath the soft lantern glow of the barn. The ranch hands began competing to see who could learn fastest. Tommy, once skeptical, became her most eager student, showing off words he'd spelled on feed sacks. Even Jim started dropping by, leaning against the doorway with that easy, half-smile as he listened. One night, as the last of the men drifted off, Jim remained. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "I've always believed everyone deserves a chance to learn," Margaret replied, stacking the slates. "Never thought I'd see this bunch of roughnecks sitting still for lessons." "It's not me they listen to," she said with a small smile. "It's what learning promises, control of their own lives." Jim studied her for a long moment. "You're changing this place, Miss O'Brien, more than you realize." Quote. Before she could reply, Rosa appeared at the barn door. "You planning to talk all night, or let the lady get her rest?" Jim tipped his hat, grinning. "Yes, ma'am." The next morning brought visitors, families from nearby ranches, drawn by curiosity about the Boston teacher. Among them was Mrs. Patterson, mother of 3, with bright eyes and a baby balanced on one hip. "A real school teacher way out here," she said. "We could use one proper school for all the children, maybe that place down by Cedar Springs." Margaret's heart leaped. "A schoolhouse," she breathed. "For everyone." Jim overheard and joined them. Cedar Springs would make sense. Good water, central to all the ranches. "It could work," Margaret said, excitement lighting her face, "with everyone helping." Jim looked at her, admiration plain. "You think big, Miss O'Brien." "I think possible," she answered. That evening, as sunset bled gold over the valley, Margaret stood outside the main house, watching the light fade behind the mountains. The desert no longer felt like a threat, but a challenge, one she was learning to meet. Behind her, Jim's voice broke the quiet. "You did well today." "So did you," she said, turning. He was close now, the fading light carving his features into bronze and shadow. "You keep pushing harder than anyone I've met," he said softly, "and look what happens. People start believing again." Margaret's pulse fluttered. "You make it sound like I'm some kind of miracle worker." Jim shook his head. "No miracle, just heart. The kind that burns wilder than any fire out here." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he touched his hat, stepping back. "Get some rest, teacher. Big day tomorrow." Margaret watched him walk away, the last light of dusk catching the edge of his hat brim. She realized with a start that somewhere between exhaustion and survival, she had begun to care. Deeply. The desert had tested her strength and found it real. But Jim Morrison was testing something else. The walls she'd built around her heart. And for the first time, Margaret wasn't sure she wanted those walls to hold. The wind carried the smell of cedar and rain when Margaret woke that morning. Change was in the air. Real, powerful change. The old barn classroom was no longer enough. With every passing week, more families brought their children to the Circle M, some riding half a day just for a few hours of lessons. Jim had been right. Word had spread fast. Even the roughest ranch hands were proud to say they were schoolmen now. but Margaret could see the strain in Jim's face. He'd been working longer hours, dealing with supply shortages and rumors of trouble brewing south near Cedar Springs. When he came in that morning, dust on his boots and tension in his shoulders, she knew before he spoke. "Kane's men were spotted again," he said. "Looks like they're sniffing around Cedar Springs, probably planning to stake a false claim on the water there." Margaret set down her cup. "That's where the school was supposed to go." Jim nodded grimly. "We'll lose the land if they get those papers filed first." Quote, "Then we can't let them," Margaret said simply. "We'll ride there and stake it ourselves." Jim blinked. "You mean we?" "Yes, we," she said, chin lifting. "I didn't come all this way to let men like Silas Kane decide the future. We'll build that school with our own hands if we have to." A slow, incredulous smile tugged at his mouth. "You've got more grit than most men I know, Miss O'Brien." "Good thing I'm not one of them," she said. By sundown, wagons rolled toward Cedar Springs loaded with lumber, nails, and determination. Families from every nearby ranch came to help. Even Tommy Martinez, barely 19, arrived with a hammer and a grin. "You said to bring my pride, Miss Margaret," he told her. "Figured I'd bring my back too." The air buzzed with energy as men sawed boards, women cooked for the workers, and children gathered stones for the foundation. It was more than a building. It was a statement. That night, under a sky bursting with stars, Margaret and Jim stood on the edge of the half-built school. Lanterns flickered across the site, casting golden halos on working figures. "I can't believe it," Margaret whispered. "It's really happening." Jim looked out over the gathering, his eyes reflecting firelight. "You made it happen." She turned toward him. "We did. You gave them something to fight for." His gaze softened. "Maybe, but you gave them a reason to believe again." Before she could answer, thunder rumbled far away. A storm brewing over the mountains. "Rain's coming," Jim said. "Let's get everyone back to camp before it breaks." But the storm moved faster than they did. By the time they reached the wagons, the sky had turned black, lightning tearing it open. "This way!" Jim shouted above the wind, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a lined shack nearby. They burst inside just as hail began hammering the roof. Margaret was soaked, her hair clinging to her face, dress heavy with water. Jim tossed his hat aside and worked to get a fire going. His hands were steady, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "You all right?" he asked, turning toward her. She nodded, though her teeth chattered. "Just cold." He threw a blanket around her shoulders. The warmth of his hands lingered even after he stepped back. "You shouldn't have been out here," he said softly. "It's too dangerous with Kane stirring things up." "And leave you to face it alone?" she replied, meeting his gaze. "No, Jim. We started this together." Lightning flashed through the small window, and for a moment their faces were lit in sharp relief, his lined with care, hers glowing with resolve. He took a slow breath. "You know, there's something about you, Margaret O'Brien. You push harder than anyone I've ever known." Her lips curved faintly. "And that's a problem?" Quote, "Only when it makes me want to protect you more than I should." Silence filled the small space, thick as the storm outside. The fire cracked, sending shadows dancing along the walls. "You can't protect me from everything," she said gently. "But you don't have to. I'm not afraid anymore." Jim's eyes softened. "No, you're not. That's what scares me most." Quote. He reached out then, his fingers brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. It was a simple gesture, tender, hesitant, but it held every unspoken word between them. Margaret's heart beat faster. "Jim." He shook his head slightly, voice rough. "I just need you to know, you've changed this place. You've changed me. I thought the land was all I needed, but I was wrong." She swallowed hard. "And what do you need, then?" He smiled, slow, honest, a little broken. "You, just you, Margaret. And maybe a world where this school stands long after we're gone." She stepped closer, the firelight painting her face gold. "Then we'll build it together." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Together. The storm howled around them, but inside, the world had gone still. By morning, the sky had cleared. The rain had washed the desert clean, leaving the earth rich with the smell of sage and promise. Work resumed at dawn. The men set the roof beams, the women whitewashed the walls, and the children painted crude flowers on the front boards. When the last plank was nailed and the bell hung above the door, Jim took Margaret's hand. "Ring it," he said. She pulled the rope. The clear, bright sound echoed across the valley, carried on the wind like a vow. Families cheered. Children clapped. Rosa cried openly. And Jim looked at Margaret as if the sound itself had written their future. But peace never lasted long in the West. By sundown, word came that Silas Kane had filed a new claim to the water at Cedar Springs. Without that water, every ranch, including the school, would die by summer. Jim clenched his jaw. He won't stop. Margaret's voice was steady. Then neither will we. The next days were filled with tense waiting and watchful nights. Riders kept guard over the well. Rosa prayed over every meal. But the attack everyone feared never came. Instead, a letter did, from Tucson. The territorial judge had ruled in their favor. The land and its water belonged to the community. When the news spread, the celebration lasted until dawn. Margaret stood outside the finished school, the first rays of morning touching her face. Behind her, laughter and music filled the air. Jim came up quietly, his hand finding hers. "We did it," he said softly. She smiled. "No, they did, the people." He turned her to face him fully. "Maybe, but none of this would have happened without you." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, rough and gentle all at once. "I don't know what tomorrow holds, Margaret O'Brien, but I know this. I don't want to face another one without you." The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Margaret smiled through sudden tears. "I think that can be arranged." Above them, the bell rang again, clear, proud, defiant. The desert had tried to break her, but instead, it had given her everything. A purpose, a community, and the one man who'd stood beside her through storm and fire. And together they had built something that would outlast them both.